It almost seems like my talents outliving him gave us some sort of justice.
Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have a power-packed episode here, so we're going to get to the headlines here in a second. In this episode, you're going to hear my commentary on the carrier deal, which got struck late last week. And most importantly, I want people to understand what this deal gives us, what insight it gives us into the type of economic policy that President-elect Trump's going to have, his skill set that I think we're getting all wrong, which I think this deal illuminates for us, and why this reality show approach to governing is so dangerous. So you're going to hear my commentary on that later in the show. You're going to hear some commentary and some updates on the Cabinet of Deplorables that President-elect Trump is bringing together. And one of the most prominent Latinos in U.S. politics made a power move late last week, and I want to let people know my insights on that and what I think this foretells for the future of this longtime Latino political rock star and the future of the state of California and potentially the future of our country. So you're going to hear, but most importantly on this episode, as we all know, not too long ago, Fidel Castro, one of the world's global icons, passed away over the last few weeks. And it took me some time, but I wanted to make sure that we got several Cuban-American voices to be part of this show to really discuss their perspectives. So you're going to hear throughout the show the commentary and the perspective and the truth of great friends like Nissim Leon, our great friend from Los Angeles, un cubano de verdad. Jenny Lorenzo, the YouTube star, you know her as the Cuban abuelita, so someone from the arts community, born and raised in Miami, now out in L.A., and Rick Herrero, for those that have been involved in Cuban issues, no stranger to Rick. Rick is the founder of Cuba Now and has been one of the one of the most critical leaders to advocate successfully for the normalization, the first steps towards the normalization of Cuba-U.S. relations during the Obama administration. So, Rick, I ask people to understand, as you hear their different perspectives, they're all very different, very diverse. And as Jenny said in her commentary, they're all our personal truths. So I ask everyone that has various opinions on Fidel's legacy and that history to appreciate and respect all their perspectives. And just to be clear, you're going to hear all of their full interviews unedited on future episodes of Ray's Talk Show that'll be released in the coming weeks. But for the purposes of this episode, you're going to just hear snippets about sort of their initial personal reactions to the hearing of their death and some comments about what they hope for the future of the island and for the Cuban-American and the Cuban diaspora around the country and around the world. So thank you again so much for Rick Herrero, Nissim Leon, and Jenny Lorenzo for joining this episode in truncated form of Ray's Talk Show. And again, you're going to hear just excerpts, and you'll hear their full commentary in upcoming episodes. Again, thank you so much for listening to Ray's Talk Show. If you like this kind of political analysis and discussion from a Latino perspective on politics and the hottest issues impacting our community and all Americans and really everybody, feel free to subscribe and download Ray's Talk Show on iTunes. If you're on the Android side, anywhere you can listen to a podcast, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Spotify, all the above, iHeartRadio. Reviews are very, very helpful, believe me. So feel free to leave us a review on those platforms, or just check out our website, rayspodcast.com. That's where all of our content is. We'd love to have you visit the website. If you have any questions, commentary about the content of our shows, any questions you have for me and our guests about some of the hottest political issues or anything on your mind, feel free to email me at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us again, and let's get into the bochinche.
It's something that you wait for your whole life as a Cuban, especially growing up in Miami. Everybody talks about it. Los viejos playing dominoes or drinking cafecito la carreta. Your grandparents, your parents, the stories are retold almost like weekly. And I never thought that I was going to get that emotional. I legit just started to cry. And my boyfriend, who's Peruvian, Puerto Rican, like he was obviously raised in Miami and he gets it, but at the same time, I remember him just looking at me a little weirded out because I don't think he was expecting for me to get emotional. What added to the emotion was the fact that my grandparents died on my mother's side. They were the ones who raised me practically, and they passed away just 6 months ago, 5 days apart, very much like The Notebook. And they couldn't live to see this. It was really upsetting. So I think the emotions were a mix of both a happy kind of emotion. It was some sort of strange relief, even though I know very well that his brother is no better and Cuba has a long way to go. But it was that kind of relief, that happiness for so many people who had suffered under his regime, and the fact that my grandparents couldn't be here to witness this.
So the HVAC company Carrier had, essentially threatened or announced that there was going to be a few thousand jobs leaving they were no longer going to be at their Indianapolis location. They were going to move down to Mexico. And that call for these kind of jobs to stay in the United States were a big part of now President-elect Trump's platform. And he spoke very much about how, companies would be fined and taxed essentially on the imports that would now be coming into the United States that, for work that, traditionally have been in the USA. And so today he announced that, essentially his vice president-elect Mike Pence, who's still the governor of Indiana, wrote off on a $7 million tax break. Angel, you should be watching your Cowboys. Laura, ¿cómo está? A $7 million tax break to keep some of those jobs, not all, about 800 of the 2,000 in the United States. So again, something that I think is going to be a repeated theme of this presidency is that you're going to see things that are relatively, in a macro sense, small. So 800 jobs, and again, one person's job is not insignificant, but something like 800 jobs being, and we'll talk about the deal in a second. 800 jobs being saved by this incoming president and soon to be president are amplified in a way by his nature of theatrics, which will give his base a very positive sense of what he's doing. So, and I'll talk about my predictions, and I've been predicting this, that for the, thank you, Leo. No, not sure if I can repeat that on the air, but thank you, Leo, for your comment. Just teasing. Unlike, so in something like the bailout of the auto industry, which saved, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of jobs, maybe more, that we had a relatively, it didn't feel as significant as it actually was in a macro sense because the administration and the Democratic Party didn't do a particularly good job of highlighting the success of that legislation and that effort in the beginning of Obama's first term. And so, getting back to the Carrier deal, so initially, or throughout his campaign, President-elect Trump's policy recommendation was that any companies like Carrier that would move jobs abroad, the products that those foreign workers or workers abroad would produce that would be then re-imported into the United States would be heavily taxed. Fast forward to today, the announcement was that essentially Carrier would get $7 million tax break to keep some of those jobs in the United States. There was no mention of the fact that the vast majority of these jobs are still going to leave the majority of these jobs are still going to leave the country. Where's the word of the tax? So instead of now companies being taxed, they're being given tax breaks, even though they're still going to be outsourcing a significant amount of these jobs. So you can argue, as Senator Sanders did today in an op-ed, that the guy that's supposedly the great negotiator is looks like a big pushover. Any company essentially could threaten, hypothetically, leaving the United States or sending jobs abroad, and they could go ask for their piece of corporate welfare. And so which happens all the time, particularly in urban America and places like Camden and, throughout the country where, sports stadiums, I mean, Las Vegas, I think the state of Nevada, frankly, shamefully, even though as a sports fan, I like the idea of the Raiders being in Vegas. But the reality is there's hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to go build a stadium for billionaires that really should be going, particularly to the education system in Las Vegas. And so this is the latest example of corporate welfare being promoted, being spun as a mechanism to create job growth, when it speaks to what appears to be the strategy we're going to revert to from the 80s in the Reagan administration, which was trickle-down economics. So what we're going to see, so the predictions on this end is that we're going to continue to see, under the guise of saving jobs, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. And at times you do have to cut certain deals. It's understandable. But you're going to see a continual trend where the stimulus package isn't going to be about so much block grants to green light certain projects. It's going to be guised in a way of providing pork and tax incentives and tax breaks to companies on the assumption that that will stimulate them to do more, to produce more, and be more active in their business. And that's going to be spun. You're going to see shows, I predict, on the immigration side. One of the things you're going to see is there's no way that President-elect Trump, even if he's in office 8 years, will deport as many undocumented immigrants as President Obama did. The deporter-in-chief indeed deported over 2 million people. He's not going to deport 2 million people. And so, but what's going to happen, you heard it here first, is that at some point next year, they're going to prepare deporting a few hundred Latino men on that border. They're going to make a big show of lining them up along the border. Trump's going to go down there, and whoever his Homeland Security is, and he's gonna say, "Look at this great job we did, law and order, success." Load them up in the vans or however they transport them, and the show, the symbol of them being taken across the border. Again, that 200, 300 people that'll be a part of that spectacle, that disgusting spectacle, will rile up the base and promote this appearance of strength, when the reality is, for various business interests, it's literally impossible for him, and logistically and financially, it's literally impossible for him to deport the amount of people he's talking about. He doesn't even know the numbers. He says, "I'm going to deport all the ones that, all the undocumented people that are criminals." I mean, if there's 11 to 1 million of our people out here that don't have undocumented, how many of them even if you add up all the ones with traffic tickets, it's no more than a couple 100,000. And that's talking about stretching the definition of criminal. But you're going to see these shows, and this is one of the things that I'm very concerned about. Pretty sure that his base of support is feeling very good about today. Wow, carrier, save jobs, middle America, the kind of job, we were promised and my grandfather had. And again, I am happy for these people to keep their jobs. And, if it's a one-off example, it maybe doesn't, you can argue it's not a bad deal. But the reality is that this is the trend you're going to see. You're going to see big show for relatively small results. And when you start peeling the onion of what's really involved from a policy perspective, it's corporate welfare, tax write-offs, and basically a very bad negotiator. So when he starts taxing these corporations for those imports that Jennifer and our friends that are on the chat are discussing, call me. I'm not holding my breath.
Funny, I was in Buenos Aires when the news apparently broke, or at least when I heard about it. It was around 4:30 in the morning, our time, and I was there with my wife and our baby girl, and our baby girl had just started crying, and my wife was rocking her, and I heard her and I asked, "What's happening?" And she's like, "No, she was hungry. I'm feeding her. But by the way, Fidel just died." I'm like, "What?" And I look at my phone, and sure enough, my phone's already blowing up with news and people texting me, calling me, emailing me. about the news of Fidel's passing. The first thing I felt was a sense of relief. For someone who has long advocated for the normalization of relations between the United States and Cuba, I've perceived Fidel as being more of a crutch who's been utilized, particularly over the last decade, by forces on both shores as a pretext for inaction. That as long as Fidel was around, there are certain things that we can't do to improve relations, to improve conditions for the Cuban people. And now that he's gone, I feel it's one less excuse that we have on the table for inaction.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was, kind of where we're at with the cabinet is first fear-mongering show against Muslims or Latinos. I think it's easier to do it against Latinos, Leo, because it's obvious. Look, the sad reality is they have the DACA list. That's the thing that keeps me up at night. Those poor young people, we have to support them, and we've let them put themselves on the front line in our movement way too long, and we need to step it up and take center stage on this and support them and protect them. The Muslim piece, that's going to be a little more complicated for him to show. There's no doubt about it. Jennifer Duran says on the chat, the cabinet is the real basket of deplorables. It sounds like a real bad animated movie that'll come out that Kevin Hart will probably do a voiceover on. So for people that have been keeping up, as Jennifer Duran just said eloquently on the chat, we've just had what a who's who, a hodgepodge of cabinet members. So a guy named Nunchkin, who's basically a Goldman Sachs Wall Street guy, a Secretary of Treasury. His apparently his qualifications for this job is that he raised millions of dollars for Donald Trump. Kathy DeVos, one of the leading advocates in the country, a billionaire. Kathy DeVos, named Secretary of Education. She's been one of the great advocates for particularly vouchers in education. I'll get to that, and that's going to be very interesting. By the way, a woman associated her family are the Amway empire. Wilbur Ross, who looks really out of it. I saw an interview today. So, it's interesting because my father commented in a conversation I had with him this week is that, the billionaires and the proverbial man that typically kind of run these, traditionally, are controlling the marionettes in the background, usually stay in the background. In this administration, they seem to feel so comfortable in the power that they've acquired that they're front and center in this. So it truly is historic in that sense. We usually rarely have billionaires in the cabinet. They control the process oftentimes, but it truly is scary. If you just go down the list, the new Health and Human Services or potentially the Health and Human Services nominee. Not only are we talking about right-wing conservative ideology, we're talking about ideology that really has very little even acknowledgement, doesn't even pretend that they're really looking out for working people. On the Latino side, I would say, I think we're going to frankly have some very interesting, and some of it I think will be healthy, some very interesting conversations and about this, while many of us, particularly progressives that are part of this conversation right now, understand what sort of diverting public education funds to corporate charter school systems, to parochial education systems, which there is. While that we understand the logistical and the policy problems that creates, the reality is, your average Latino family, working family in the community, in an inner city or in a badly resourced ex-urban or rural community, if you offer that family a voucher to send their kid to a local Catholic or parochial school, or just provide them what they see as options as it relates to their child's education, that could be an issue that could be used as a quote-unquote wedge issue that we have to address. And it's going to be really important that advocates in our community educate folks. We can have disagreements. Look, the reality is we know our faith-based community, the Catholic Church, Christian leadership that have faith-based organizations may already have schools. there's going to be a part of this message from this woman that's going to be attractive to them. So that's going to be a very particular element of it. But look, on the Treasury side, I mean, Wall Street's going to run this. And, it's been very interesting, but not surprising that some of Trump's most ardent supporters that claimed they supported him because he would, quote unquote, drain the swamp, that he wasn't bought or owned by Wall Street or the quote unquote political establishment. Where are they now? Where are they now when they're openly being played? Where are they now when, weeks ago after the election, the call was, why don't you people stop complaining, stop whining? The racist talk, demagoguery was just talk. It's not serious. And we proceeded to see hundreds of hate crimes directed at people of color and women in the LGBT community. And the rhetoric has not subsided. And hard right wing, and in the case of Steve Bannon, actual leaders in the acknowledged white supremacist movement are being tapped in some of the most influential positions in this administration. Great to see David Galarza here. You talk about a real leader there, man. He says it like it is, that guy. I'm surprised, David, you're not in Penuelas as we speak. Much respect to our folks in Penuelas. So in terms of the nominations, there's so many battles there. We're going to have to be strategic. I think that the Attorney General nominee, Senator Jeff Sessions, who I spoke about on last week's show, is one that we're going to have to, gall in on that fight, particularly since he does have to, unlike a Steve Bannon and a few of the other White House nominees, he has to be approved by the Senate, which is going to be an uphill climb. But we're essentially talking about 5 or 6 senators that we're going to need to flip, and we have some thoughts on that from Senator Heller in Nevada and a few others we're going to be targeting. And we're just going to have to be vigilant about holding this administration accountable every step of the way. And as it comes to the cabinet, I don't believe, obviously, there's going to be very little diversity as it relates to people of a certain class. I mean, Romney would probably be the poorest guy in the cabinet if he was there. But the folks that are going to be controlling domestic policy, the incoming Health and Human Services Director, potentially Price, Education, DeVos. I mean, these are the people that, oh my God, Lou Barletta could be the labor secretary. My God, what a disaster this is. These are the positions that are going to most directly impact our folks day to day. And so we have to be really vigilant on that.
The sacrifice that my parents had to go through was immense. And so you wanted to be sure, man, this guy, and I hate to use this term because, to be quite honest with you, and forgive me for this, Ray, the bastard doesn't deserve it, but he was larger than life. 2 of my aunts died. My dad never saw him after 66. That's tough. I can't tell you firsthand because I didn't live it, but I lived with those who did. There's no one that's going to be able to look me in the face and tell me how great Che Guevara was, or tell me how great the ideology of Fidel Castro was. There's no way. You're not going to be able to tell me. You're not going to be able to tell me that. And so when I hear the stories of all the people that actually went through it, the people that their uncles were killed, their brothers were killed, their grandparents were killed, it doesn't get any worse than that, Ray.
It's not even about my family. It's about my friends and my friends' families, especially living in Miami. Nearly everyone went through a very similar situation. Some escaped through the, freedom flights. Some did so with Peter Pan, which that's some of the more heartbreaking stories because they never saw their parents again. They were children. And then even people that escaped via raft. It's just insanity. And all these stories and you see it. And it's not just, there's been a lot of comments that are like, well, you can't just go off of things based on your little grandparents' stories, as if they were little fairy tales, I have family in Cuba right now. They're not happy. This isn't like some folk tale that's been passed on and a lot of, can get lost in translation. this is real. There's people suffering. There's people that I know that are suffering right now.
And again, you're listening to Ray's Live. Appreciate y'all on a Thursday night. Got about a dozen people watching Ray's Live. A lot of family and friends really appreciate it. I know you're not watching because of my looks, even though I'm okay. You know, I'm pleasantly surprised at my age that I still have as much black hair as I have here. It looks very black against the white on in the lighting here. So I do appreciate that. But I know y'all are. I'm just a vessel for the frustrations, the questions that many of you have about what we do in the future. And look, the reality is we got to do this. This is our civil rights moment, particularly in the Latino community. And we don't not just have to do it for Latinos. We have to do it for the most vulnerable people in our society, within our community, the immigrant community. A lot of these policies around healthcare reform, around some of these tax policies that are quietly being proposed, the dismantling of Medicare, Medicaid, a lot of them in particular are going to impact negatively the most single women. Who's that impacting? Young women, women of color, people that are trying to do the right thing. They're working, they're raising their children oftentimes with very low support. And instead of trying to figure out how to support them more with tax, with expanded earned income tax credits, which is something we're going to advocate for, with subsidies for daycare, which actually Ivanka spoke about. Haven't heard her speak much lately about it. And other, incentives and opportunities for access to higher education. We're going to sneakily, potentially, with this administration, create policies that are going to undercut those women more and more and more and more. And it's truly disgusting. And we have to be vigilant. Thank you, Prima, for the shout out. And I love doing it. Love the interaction with you guys. I literally get a call from somebody every day in my life at this point, recanting these kind of stories that they heard through a third party, that happened to a neighbor, happened to a friend, maybe happened to them. And it's happening all over the country. And again, you're listening to Ray Collazo on Ray's talk show, whether it's a podcast or the live feed. Thank you again for catching us. And again, we really appreciate the love. You can iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, anywhere you can download a podcast if you can give us a review. And so on the political side, it's been interesting Latino political stuff happening, which is not going to get as much mainstream attention. But if people saw today that longtime California Congressman Xavier Becerra announced he would be stepping down from Congress to become the California Attorney General. So Governor Jerry Brown, yes. I know Pop's thinking Jerry Brown's still around. Yeah, Jerry Brown and he's a pretty good governor in his second act here, or his third act or fourth act. There's been a lot of acts in that play in Jerry's political life. But Jerry had to fill the vacancy of Kamala Harris, his current Attorney General, who's stepping away from there to be the newest California senator. And it's a very interesting political move for people that know Xavier Becerra is the highest ranking Latino in the history of the U.S. Congress. He was in the Democratic leadership, and the head of the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives, and he was term limited for that. So people were wondering what was going to be his next move, and it turns out that he's making this move to go to be the Attorney General of California. Very significant. He'll be the second cabinet member or statewide official in California after Starr as well. And so what's significant about that is, on a career trajectory, for people that don't know Javier's history, his dream in life was always to be the Speaker of the House. That was always what Xavier Becerra wanted to do. And he carefully crafted his congressional career by building his forging a path to be in House leadership. So when he became the Democratic caucus leader, that was a step in that path. Now that, the Congress doesn't appear to be Democratic anytime soon, and the fact that there was this opportunity to be the Attorney General, I think it strategically makes a lot of sense. So being a statewide official in a very prominent role, very visible role, where he can really work on some very proactive, progressive policies around many of the things, particularly around housing, discrimination, and other issues that Kamala Harris was working on as Attorney General, that he can continue on. And that positions him very well to potentially run for governor in the near future. But I think the more likely scenario is he's eyeing the Senate seat that will eventually be relinquished by, which I think is coming up in 2018. So he may be making big moves sooner than we think. And Congressman Becerra will be missed. He was always, the guy is the Latino Boy Scout. If you've never met this guy, don't know much about him, Google him. He has got an incredible personal story, family of immigrants, to a top flight education background. I think he's a Harvard guy, and just very buttoned up, very polished, very classy Latino leader, Javier, and has supported the work of Latino leaders around the country. I know he helped many friends of ours run for Congress and do other things. There was a little controversy with his support for Kamala Harris in the Senate race. He didn't support a fellow Hispanic member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Loretta Sanchez, who ran for that seat, and he got a little heat for that, particularly other members of the caucus, and particularly Texas Congressman Filimon Vela really handed it to him, and was pretty upfront about his dissatisfaction with that decision. But that's politics, and it was pretty clear Kamala was the heavy favorite going into the general election.
My suggestion is, if you're an American citizen, visit the island. It is now easier and cheaper to fly to Cuba than it has ever been. There is a possibility that this window may close, depending on what measures President-elect Trump may or may not take in the future. But as of right now, you can go on any airline website and book a flight to Cuba for $200 or less, and you can travel there. Whether you're a Cuban-American, whether you're as long as you're a U.S. citizen, you will have no issue traveling there. You have to pick one of 12 categories under which you will travel in. But it's as easy as booking flight to travel anywhere else in the world. And that's the best way to get to know Cuba, to get to know the people of Cuba, by engaging them, by understanding their needs, their fears, their hopes. And that's how you identify also ways to be able to help them, to be able to, whether it's by helping their businesses or helping create awareness for whether they're an artist for their artwork, or whether they're a writer for their output, or whether they're an independent blogger. But go there, meet them, engage them. That's I can tell you that travel has been the greatest catalyst for change in Cuba that there has been. It's not, it's hard to show a direct correlation, but it's no coincidence that since Obama started opening up Cuba travel, we have seen more changes take place in Cuba than in the previous 50 years. And it's because they're receiving this wealth of information, of contacts, of resources, of capital that's coming from abroad. Even among dissidents, I mean, part of the reason why dissidents are more active than ever is because they have more resources at their disposal than ever. And why is that? It's because they can now, under Cuban law, they can now travel outside of their own country, something they couldn't do before 2013, something that no Cubans could do, or it was very difficult to do before 2013. And also because you have folks from here traveling to visit them and bring them supplies and bring them all sorts of resources. So, and that works with every sector. That works with religious groups. That works with the entrepreneurial sector. That works with everyday Cubans who are just trying to get by. That engagement helps empower the people in the island like nothing else. So travel to Cuba.
And you can always check us out at Ray's podcast.com or download Ray's Talk Show, Ray's Podcast, anywhere you can download a podcast. You probably have this little purple app that has a little microphone dude in your iPhone, your new iPhone. You can just type in the search bar there, and you can download the show and give us some love and give us a review. That's really helpful, Leo. Yes, they're all Stanford Cardinals, those guys. Very sharp guys, the Castro brothers and Xavier Becerra. Last thing I wanted to say as we wrap this up is much love for everyone that is not only in solidarity with our Native American brothers and sisters at Standing Rock, peacefully protesting the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline, but in particular, two friends of the show, Cindy Rodriguez and Natalie Falfan, who host their own podcast, Latinos from New Jersey, who lead the Morado Lens podcast. So if you're into this diverse flavor and voices. They have a real spicy Latinas, hardcore Latina conversation going on. Their podcast, so definitely check out Morado Lens podcast. You can, but in particular, both those ladies have announced today they're going to North Dakota this weekend to stand in solidarity. Now we're talking about not only getting to North Dakota and the personal sacrifice it takes just to get to North Dakota. You ain't getting a direct flight out of North Dakota out of Philly or DC. Let me tell you, it takes a minute to get to North Dakota, much less into the rural hinterland where the Native American lands are out there. But you're talking about freezing temperatures, people being sprayed with cold water in freezing temperatures. Imagine the health risk. These women are literally putting themselves on the line. So much respect to Cindy, Natalie, and as Vanessa on the chat points out, the veterans, including Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, that are they're going to be standing in solidarity with our Native American brothers and sisters in North Dakota. And whether it's Standing Rock, Penuelas in Puerto Rico, activists are doing everything they can to try to prevent coal ash from being dumped into a landfill in Penuelas on the southern coast of the island. This is a company that's been dumping ash, this similar ash in an area of the Dominican Republic for many years. It's documented that this ash is causing incredible health problems to the children and even birth defects and newborns in the DR. And now they're taking this nonsense to the island of Puerto Rico. So much respect again to our brothers and sisters in solidarity with you in Penuelas and in Standing Rock. It's very interesting because, there's so much. I mean, there's like a national obsession now about the feelings of the proverbial, the disgruntled working class white person in the Rust Belt and in Middle America, right? And look, we've been saying it here for many years. We're all getting screwed, and we all need to stand up together. So this is not in any way to demean the fears, the concerns, the pain that people that have been left behind by this economy have experienced. No doubt about it. But it's really interesting because when we talk about this disgruntled group of people, there's a lot of care towards their feelings, towards their financial futures, towards their security, towards their respect. Rightfully so. But my question is, that I want us all to think about this. My question is, why isn't that same care, that same empathy, that same sensitivity, that same attention paid to working people who just happen to be of a different color and live in a different part of the United States? I know I'm busting my ass. I know everyone watching this right now, regardless of the color you are, live in the inner city, live in the burbs, what have you, are working really damn hard. And by the way, statistically, even if we work at the same level, we make much less, especially our women. And so, when we talk about, why Standing Rock's important, why Black Lives Matter is important, why Penuelas is important, and why we need to keep talking about it among, because it's clear that the corporate media is not going to pay much attention. So while we have to continue to push for that diversity and that attention on that end of it, we have to use these forums. And that's why I do this. Look, I'm tired. I got to go to work in the morning. I just put my kids to sleep. And, but I know the pain y'all are feeling. I know the fear. Y'all text me. Y'all call me. You send me Facebook messages. You email me. You tweet me. You say, Ralph, what are we going to do? It's real scary. And the one thing I want to make sure that we're clear on is we've got to do this together. And we're all going to roll up our sleeves. Like I said, this is our moment right now. And not only to do it for us, but to do it for even people that have less of a voice, whether they're immigrants or the disabled or, go on and on and on. But that we have to demand and never waver on the respect and the humanity that our community deserves. Because in the same way that guy that lives in Saginaw, Michigan, who doesn't know what to do now because his factory left 3-4 years ago and he hasn't gotten it together, so that we have to absolutely do what we can to support that person. We have to demand equal respect, equal acknowledgement of the contribution, because the underlying message of the discussion of the quote unquote working class white person is that on some level that implies almost explicitly that black and Latino citizens aren't working as hard and not as contributing financially or culturally to this country. And that's nonsense. And we have to combat the stereotype that, blacks are lazy and inner city people are like gaming the system and, welfare queens, because that sentiment is still a big part, whether people want to admit it or not, part of this dynamic that we're experiencing and part of the Trump phenomenon. He played on those fears. He played on those stereotypes. And you're not going to tell me that this fascination now by the mainstream media about this, disgruntled segment of our population, when as someone who just, Munasha, one of the gentlemen that just came on the chat, said, we've been dealing with similar hardships for decades, is being ignored. And our brothers and sisters are in Standing Rock and Penuelas and all over the country dealing with this stuff.
Cuba's going to go through a very rough period. Transition is hard. You don't have to look very far. You have to just look at what happened in the Soviet Union, especially when people have not had freedom for that long. I'm hoping for the best, and I think more than anything, people brought up a great point. This is more of a symbolic thing than anything. Fidel was no longer in power. His brother has been running the country since 11. And so I know that still, he obviously probably had input, but the reality is that, his brother was now running the show, for all intents and purposes. And I don't know, besides the symbolism of someone that killed your family, made you leave the country, took everything from you, I really don't know what it means. I'm hoping it's a great giant step. Ideally, and I might be full of crap for saying this, but, I'm thinking if I'm Raul, maybe I want to just make my own legacy.
Get to work, y'all. Get your rest. I guess the last thing I'll say is we have to figure out how to support each other physiologically, because a lot of us are going through it. We're stressing. We're not resting. We're really scared about the future, and we're really sort of wondering, we've all done so much, and these generations, we've all done so much to get to this point. And the Obama president, he talked about symbolism, God bless you, Luz. Symbolism, right? I mean, it represented, his presidency amongst anything represented so much validation for so many of us, that our families were a part of this country, that we could truly be comfortable in our own skin as Americans, and our kids could live in a world that didn't have all that, as much of that crap that we all grew up with, animosity and division and segregation and feeling, having to justify your identity and all these hangups and complejos that all created for all of us. And we got to this milestone in this stage of our lives where we felt that we finally could take a breath, right? And every time Michelle and Brock and their wonderful family and, and all the good things that came out of that, appreciate you, Ralph, that came out of that, these 8 years, right? Psychologically for us, all got tiraron la basura in one day a few weeks ago. And we're still all recovering from that. I hear from you guys, and I'm feeling it. And, I know you all are. So I think as we get closer to the holidays on the podcast and on here, we need to have more conversations about how we support each other, and just give us the space to take a breath and understand that there's nothing that an election can do to minimize or chip away at all at our humanity. And we're going to have to support each other to understand that and, kind of move forward with esa balancia, no? Thanks for listening to Ray's Talk Show. For more insights from your virtual Big Brother, Ray Collazo, and the Big Brother Ray community, subscribe to Ray's Talk Show at BigBrotherRay.com or on iTunes. To my rays of light, keep shining.